Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. And I was sharing with everybody before that this is a composite lecture that I created. Oops, I think this is the wrong one too. Hold on. This was the one we were talking about with the spiritual laws. So stop share again. It was right behind me and now I can't find it. Hold on. Okay, I think we have it now. So this is a composite where I've just kind of taken this theme that I feel like is the central theme of the pathwork in many ways, and tried to make a lecture that would sort of summarize that kind of focus and piece of it. So I call it Sacred Story Soul Journey. And you can see that the lecture numbers are usually kind of at the end of the paragraphs, and they bounce all over the place. So it's something that, I was trying to just find a thread in a way, but the guide is very vast in all of these different lectures. So it was interesting to pull. So we begin with this idea that the real self and the God within, right, is a part of this journey. So it says, and this is from the lectures, the analogy often used in dreams, as well as in other symbolic language, is that one sojourn in a human body is a journey. This analogy has often been made throughout spiritual history. It reveals a profound truth. The inner path is in constant movement through the stages of soul matter that have to be traversed. This journey is not just a metaphor. It is a constant flowing movement. And so is your own personal path. It is a movement. It carries you through your landscapes. But the task you have come to fulfill, if that is left behind, you get stuck and stay in the landscapes of certain aspects of consciousness which you have not yet united and integrated with the real self. So, take a minute just for a second, because I think, when he talks about it as a not more than a metaphor, it's a constant flowing movement, to just review sort of your life, right? In some way that makes sense, right? In just an intuitive or phenomenological level, that our history, our experience of life is like a flowing process through time. And it does seem to be, also a movement, and it carries us, and there are different places that it takes us, different landscapes, right? And so I think it's useful to kind of just work with this stuff phenomenologically a little bit, and when maybe there is no time, maybe time is, like ultimate, but in the direct human experience of it, it is this flow and this journey. So deep inside your nucleus is an infinite essence. And this inward essence is eternal life, eternal reality, eternal beauty, limitless wisdom and love. But although your outer consciousness is connected with the essence, it ignores this fact. And I guess you would say pretends in a way to be disconnected from it, right? You seem to be an isolated piece of consciousness. This is what makes life appear so frightening, and why your outer consciousness is blindly groping its way back to its connection with the total self. So your outer consciousness will eventually gain awareness of this connection, because the connection was never really broken. It only seemed broken from the vantage point of the limited outer consciousness. So in some ways, we go so far out that we lose the sense of the connectedness that we have to our, larger and deeper self. And then we seem to be like these small physical beings, kind of in a very big, vast universe with, pain and suffering. And there's a certain level, it's not like there isn't a truth to that perspective, but it's not the full reality, right? And so if we can, begin to realize that that's sort of the experience of the individual, and the journey is to kind of reconnect with that larger sense of self, and that's part of what life is designed to help us do, then we can begin to help ourselves return. And basically, he says, I think in this lecture, that it's part of our task, right? And it's really part of our gift that we bring as we incarnate and work through our disconnected, fragmented aspects and bring it back into wholeness and connection. So the task of every fragmented, apparently disconnected aspect of consciousness is to realize its true identity and connection with the real self. This happens through an often laborious, groping search, through attempts of the mind to expand its own narrow limitations. The mind holds this potential for expansion. Even in its disconnected state, it contains every aspect of divine reality. Using this potential depends only on which way the mind turns, which way the will directs it, which thought the mind chooses in any given instant. And so that's a part of our free will. And so, we're really, in a sense, identified with fragments of consciousness. And the truth is that there is an overall unitive, and united level of consciousness. But when we're only aware and identified with the fragmented aspects, then we lose the connection with the larger self.
Darlene, can I ask a question?
Uh-huh.
You use the word mind in there, and I always get confused between mind and brain. Are they synonymous as far as the pathwork is concerned, or are they different entities, or what?
I think so. I mean, I think in most, certainly the way I use it, let me speak from that, it's like, I mean, it's true that the mind is, even in the physical body, is more than the brain, right? We have a mind in our heart, we have a mind in our gut, we have, and most healers and most spiritual paths, talk about all the bodies, and there's intelligence, there's consciousness in all of the bodies. So I would say that, mind is the totality of the embodied consciousness, and maybe the, like the limited, aspect of consciousness that we focus on is only identified with certain, like with the brain or with the intellect or with the logic or the, but I think the mind also includes all of our experience and the interpretation of the experience. And so I don't know if that makes sense in this context. Let's see. So the mind holds the potential for expansion, even in its disconnected state. Yeah.
So I mean, wouldn't like the brain be like the spontaneous movement of like bodily functions? Like the brain moves your hand, the mind doesn't necessarily, but the brain.
Well, but I don't know. To me, the mind moves your hand, because I'm not very materialistic in that I don't think that, it all happens in the brain. So, to me, the brain is maybe like an antenna, maybe a transducer, maybe, and yes, it does, operate and have a lot of function that's unconscious, dealing with the bodily functions that seem to happen. But I think consciously moving my hand is done through my inner mind, making that determination or decision or free will choice to do that, right? And I don't know that exists in the brain. Maybe it does. I mean, I think the brain is just way too small of an organ to put everything in it that we're putting into it. I mean, it's like, that's just, it's, to me, it's just a small part of the mind. It's an aspect of it, but certainly not all. But it's where, that's a part of, now neuroscience is really, going in there and, trying to look at all the different parts of the brain and understand it all in that way. But, to me so far, it's good things that they're learning, but I don't think
Mm,
they're even getting close to understanding the human mind.
mm,
And there's, just, to me, the body is part of the unconscious consciousness, right? So the body has all of these places where it's holding unconsciously, habitually, the mind or the brain, or I don't know, to me, it's, it's the mind has all these patterns of recycling and repeating and defense and all of that, and that to me is in like the whole body mind, to me, it's a one thing, a body mind. And it's a body's mind, right? Because it's not just the physical body, it's the etheric body, the emotional body, the
mm.
spiritual body, the mental body, right? All that. So,
This could
and
be a
all of
whole
those are
lecture in
mine.
itself, right?
Right. I just did a program this afternoon on the Red, Earthwalk Ways blog that I was reading from Stephen Harad Booner, and he talks about the intelligence of the heart in the direct perception of nature, and he talks about the heart mind, and it's vast and it's huge, and it's the one that I feel like we're trying to, like bring online, we've well developed the brain mind or whatever, the logical, rational, right hemisphere or left hemisphere brain kind of stuff. But the larger, capacities that we have are, I think, in the heart and through the heart.
It's also interesting that we've come up with the term mindful, but we haven't come up with the term brainful. You know, so when you do something that's mindful, it's like a well thought out, plan.
Well,
you're-
and it's also referring to presence, right?
Yeah,
Which
that's
I'm
it.
not even sure where that, I think that's more of the spiritual dimension of us, right? And so
Yeah.
we can be present to our brain functioning, we can be present to our thoughts, right? Which we usually associate, we can be present to our bodily sensations, and all of those may connect through the brain, but the awareness that's present to it, where we don't know where that comes from, I don't think yet. So yeah, good questions. I'm not sure I have good answers for them, but I in general, personally, just I see the mind as a very, very vast, capacity that we all hold and are unfolding. And the brain will probably transform and change, but I think the mind precedes it in a way, and the brain is like the instrument or organ of, in certain ways. So anyway, feel okay to go on? Anybody else want to put their 2 cents worth on that one? So I think he's using it, so that the mind holds the potential for expansion. So, and this is something he says in another place too, where he talks about how it's amazing that we have, this kind of locked in, habitual, frozen state of, patterned experience that is usually developed over our lifetime. And yet, even though it kind of runs in, these patterns, it has this potential to transform itself. It has this potential to see, oh, I'm in a pattern. Oh, let me see if I can, visualize a different way to be, a different pattern, right? Let me see if I can add something totally new to that. So that's where the guide is often amazed at, like this capacity that we have to transcend everything that we already are. And I think that's where he's, referring to, that's the mind at some level. So the fragmented aspects of consciousness of divine light, which seem to have lost their connection float around in space. This is an interesting image, I think. And then these aspects become personalities. Such personalities develop problems because of their apparent disconnection. The word problem is in accord with today's vocabulary. In other periods of history, different words were used, like sinfulness, for example. Right? So our personalities are only fragmented aspects of consciousness which have lost their connection. And it's awareness, so it has light, has the light of awareness, but it's fragmented, and in the fragmented aspects, we're not a wholeness, and so then we have a problem, right? We aren't complete. We aren't always able to, I think that comment in the Bible where Jesus says, be ye perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. We tend to do the perfectionistic, idealized self-image, kind of spiritual, ideal, but that's not what the word really means. In that sense, it's actually be ye whole as your Father in heaven is whole. So it again is kind of invoking this larger, understanding of embracing everything and becoming one with it all, right? Rather than separating out of things.
Darlene, do you think that the Holy Spirit is another terminology for unified consciousness?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think, there's a being aspect and an active aspect of it, in a sense. And so I would say, but it's the permeation of the divine consciousness within everything. And then within the movement of space-time, right? So it seems to come to me, at certain moments to, inspire or inform or to guide or, to, help or heal. And, in that sense, it's connected with my own inner resource, but it seems also beyond that resource. And sometimes it comes to me from other people or from nature itself, or, and so it's like the spirit that lives within everything, and spirit consciousness, right, is that unified state again.
So then wouldn't it stand to reason that our soul would be an ego conscious fragment of the Holy Spirit or the unified consciousness?
Yeah. And particularly our soul, our true, like what the guide calls the real self, right? And then because we are in this duality, we feel like we have to protect ourselves, life is dangerous, whatever. And we've suffered, and so we have to avoid suffering. And so we split life into duality, right, wrong, good, bad, okay, not okay. And then we have to create, our defense processes, which create a character structure that is not really our real soul. It's a superimposed outer, maybe you could think of it as armor around us, trying to keep us safe. But it becomes part of our personality, right?
Yeah, well, the way I see it is your personality actually is your soul. It's just, and within that lies your conscience and your moral character, so to speak. And it's like on this journey of purification so that it can find its way back to unified consciousness, which it split off from what is referred to as the fall.
Yeah. But the fall is continuing to happen currently because we are still choosing our defense rather than reality.
Right. Yeah. It's not that I get my personal feeling and understanding is that your soul is, when it goes back into the spirit world, it's not like it's all together in there either. Otherwise it wouldn't keep reincarnating. So the soul itself is an ego conscious fragment of unified
Right.
consciousness.
And I think it's multiple in a way, right? You know,
Yeah.
because I think there's parts of you that, let's say you were to die right now, you know, parts of your consciousness is aligned in the light, you know, and then other parts of it is trapped in a defense. And the
Exactly.
part of you that's aligned in the light is close enough, is like God enough to go be unified with God, whereas the fragment of you that was trapped in your defense stays at the level that it's capable of functioning in, right? So there's a way that we are kind of in Brazil and in the shamanic tradition, you know, they say we're a bag of beings, you know, like we're just a whole bunch of different conglomerations of consciousness kind of, and there is a unifying higher self principle, and there is a, you know, the soul, right, you know, that is sort of our, like you said, our you know, willingness to, you know, take these journeys and
Yeah.
learn and grow. It's what's coming in, and to be educated and to evolve, right? It's the evolving body, and it is a fragment of, I think, the larger evolving body, because I think even all of God is in some way evolving.
There you go. There you go. Everything is constantly evolving.
And part of it is, you know, integrating, right? So evolution is not just expanding, or, you know, but in that expansion, it's integrating. And it's part of what he says, you know, like in some ways we are beings that have gone out to the very outer reaches or edges of the universe, and we're so far out in the expansion that we've lost our connection to what is the source.
Yeah, well, that's sort of a physical way of looking at it, but you know,
Yeah, it's a image. I mean,
yeah. I mean, our personality is split into so many different parts, you know, and they're all defined in the pathwork, you know, the idealized self-image, the lower self, the superficial ego, the mature ego, the higher self, you
and
know,
the guy is saying
the
every
wounded
trait that we
child, all of
know.
that stuff. We're carrying all of that stuff around in this personality. What's not to say that your soul is not carrying all that stuff and more around in the spirit world?
Yeah, well, I think it, you know, it is in some ways. Again, you know, it's like different ways of slicing pies and talking about all of these words and identifying, you know, like it's really how you define words more than anything. But yeah, you know, I think it's all, I think at some place within, you know, our, like if you drop out of all of your thinking and kind of tune in to just your breath and just this, you know, presence of being here right now, and you know, let go of that active aspect of it, but just, you know, pure presence, pure being. I can imagine, you know, that I'm in that state, and that, you know, everything else in the universe is also connected in that state, that there is just one presence here, right? And it's shining through all of us, and it's shining in different ways, you know, like, and with different distortions and that kind of thing, where we're bending the light a little because of the impurities or whatever that are with us.
If we're lucky enough, we have some moments like that that we can recall, you know, whether they're drug induced or they come to us by grace. We may have some moments like that where we get to feel the oneness of everything, and you know.
Yeah, no, and I think, you know, many people have a mystical experience, you know, and that's one thing, and we all aspire. But what I'm saying is, you don't even need that. You can right now, here and now, feel that connection. It's not that far away. We make a big deal, and we make it far off, and we make it hard to find, and it's right here. It's right under our nose. And that's where we need to be seeking it, and not going for, you know, because yeah, you know, it's a state, you know, state of consciousness, but there's, you know, it's like, if we make it big and grand and far away, you know, like we don't see it right here, right now, in every breath. and it already is, you know, and it's all it does is take consciousness to turn and look at itself in a way, right? To just, you know,
I
feel
think you're
like,
right. I think you're right. I make it a big deal, you know, I make it something that's unattainable.
and so, you know, we do with higher self too, you know, oh, all of these higher, you know, qualities and stuff like that. And there is a way in which, you know, when we're open and empty and free, you know, divine wisdom seems to flow through, the Holy Spirit seems to flow through, right? You know, and we have access to, you know, the greater, you know, wisdom and stuff within us. But yeah, it's kind of like learning how to relax and sit back into it, because we're always kind of active and pulling ourselves out of it and up above it and trying to fix it and figure it out, and all of that activity is really the distraction away from it. And so, you know, just kind of, I don't know, like practicing presence, right? You know, do people understand that word? Like when I say, can you sense your own inner presence? You know what, and I think this somewhat goes into that heart chakra thing, right? You know, we think, oh, here's my brain, here's my mind, this is me, right? What's here?
I,
Your
li- I
being.
like to I like to think about it as being you know, like total, I don't even want to use the word total, but acceptance of what is. Like in any situation, because the minute that I try to alter what is or what has occurred, that creates fragmentation. Like that brings me further away. If I can just go to a place and say, okay, well, you know, I accept that situation. I accept that encounter. I accept it. Somehow that helps to bring me to presence.
So like you're being with it then, instead of running or fighting with it, right? You know,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so in
Or
that being with, we can sense our presence, you know, because
yeah,
we're
yeah.
and so be with your breath or yourself in this moment, you know, and just notice what's that like. So I don't know if that was, you know, you could sense that. Anybody want to share if they got it or didn't, or ask question with it? Like, you know, that we're being with whatever is. And for me, one of the keys, again, it's like when I'm in my thinking mind, in my brain, or the thought mind, or whatever, however you want to call it, right? That those thoughts, they take me away from being. That you know, they're kind of a distraction, and being is almost an embodied, you know, and it's a sensory. So I'm going to be here now, I'm aware of my body in the chair, I'm aware of the, you know, patterns on the wall, and you know, and I'm just being with it, like you were saying, you know, accepting and being here. But it is, again, you know, a very sensory and in this moment now experience. And thoughts are either in the past or in the future, and they take us out of this moment now, and we cannot be present unless we're in this moment now. And so I could never, you know, stop my thoughts, or, you know, wasn't any good at meditating or anything like that. But when Tolle talked about, you know, kind of the power of now, and he talked about, you know, lose your mind, come to your senses. He talked about, you know, like this way of just being present in the moment. Then, you know, that the thoughts leave, right? You know, if I'm thinking and I shift into feeling, right? Like I can notice even how my thoughts are making my body very agitated. And that was one of the things in that reading on the heart that, they've studied, right? And our thoughts immediately create our heart rate, and our blood pressure and everything goes up just by our thinking. It creates stress. And we're in this activated sympathetic state, and all of us live way too much in that activated sympathetic state. It's just habit of how we think the world is, and how we're supposed to be, and how we've always been. And so it really does take a kind of relaxing and grounding and feeling our way back into, sitting in our chair, or, feeling our feet on the floor, or following our breath, noticing the tension in the belly, noticing, the tightness in the shoulders, whatever's there, and just being with it. And that part that's now your awareness is now present in this moment. And that's how I understand presence as well.
Me, I kind of get a glimpse of it when I watch animals.
Ah, excellent. Yes.
Okay, because animals they don't seem to be thinking about what the hell they're going to do tomorrow, or or what they did last week. It's like, okay, right now I'm munching on a leaf, and then the next minute I'm laying down on the ground and taking a nap, and until something wakes me up or something else comes along that I have to respond to, this is what I'm doing. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to eat tomorrow or do tomorrow, or any of that. And that, for me, it's like, okay, I don't know how I can be in that kind of moment. I'm always going to be thinking about what I got to do tomorrow, or what I got to do after this Zoom call is over, or all of that stuff. It's an endless barrage of keeping up with my life.
No, and I mean, there's enough of it that we have to do, for sure. But I think we don't realize, like, just those moments. I mean, actually, that's how come I got my bunnies, right? It's like, so that when I disengage from my computer, I'm not immediately spinning into, the next thing, or, like we're, like I can, like you said, just, sit down and watch them eat a leaf, right? And the more that we practice, like, it's like you're not going to be able to live there 100% of the time, but every moment that we go into that, we begin to rediscover the depth of it, right? So it is in those moments that we're actually going to discover maybe that the worry that we had about what we were going to do about this, like some intuition or some flash of insight comes in, and all of a sudden the problem, is resolved, while we're sitting here in this space of just empty beingness, right? And so there's a way that it actually does serve the other part of our busy lives, and helps us function in that as well. But it's just has to be cultivated in between. And often, as much as we can. I mean, even just if you drive, in a car, right? Just, and what's a better thing to do while you're driving than pay real good attention to the world around you, in this moment now. You would be the safest driver, instead of letting your thoughts wander. When you walk out into your deck, pay attention to the, this is what forest bathing is, and nature therapy, just, take in what is here now. Notice the light reflecting off the leaves, and the way that the breeze is blowing, and the patterns and the sounds and the bird calls and all of that. So, all of that can call us back into this heart reality, and all of the sensory is connected to the heart and to the presence in the present moment. So, to me, that's the simplest way of really practicing and building it into our everyday life, and getting, bringing it in and down to earth instead of so far away that we think we just have to keep spinning in our thoughts. And we still have lots to do with our thoughts, and but I think as we slow down and we make these gaps in between, it starts helping, and we start calming, and we start then opening a little more to inspiration and the flow of Holy Spirit through us, right? Which we can't when we're in our active ego phase.
Yeah, it's almost like I'm thinking, Darlene, like, when you're in a beginning to feel like an emotional reaction coming, that like if you can just step back, just kind of get into presence, and like just there's something in that space that really can change a whole experience, rather than it being in hindsight where you say, oh, I should have not, I should not have reacted that way. I should not have said that. A lot of times, like, I think presence will come to me in that way where I'll just like sit back for a minute and say, okay, what's going on?
And you can also, even like, let's say you acted out, or, like and then you're feeling bad about it, or, you're back in that place where I shouldn't have done that. Right. So you can be present with that. Right.
Yeah.
How do you get present with your own, feeling about yourself when you did something wrong? Because, you can spend a lot of time sort of berating yourself or trying to, justify yourself or whatever, but really just holding it in that presence. Oftentimes what breaks through is the understanding, right? The recognition of where the child was coming from or what was going on. And somehow in seeing that, it's really all we need. And then it kind of completes the experience. Like, we don't have to, it served its purpose, right? In bringing us into awareness and presence in that way. And it's a beautiful thing, it begins to make all of experience then, the potential positive that the guide says, right? The unitive way that everything is good. And so even when we, didn't have enough presence in the moment to be present to some reaction within us, and that's what we do need to, slow down the reaction, to heal the reaction, is more presence. But a lot of times we don't even have it in the moment, right?
Yeah.
And yet it's exactly like then we come out of that and we don't get present to our own feelings about it, and that takes us further down the river. We can stop it right there if we can get present in the aftermath of it, right? Instead of going into the self-judgment and all of that. So
yeah, like, I mean, like, I personally, I have that, like, when I have a need, it's like, I hate to have a need. I hate to have to ask somebody for, like, and when you just said that about the child, it's like when I can look at my little girl and say, it's okay that you have that need, it's okay. It completely changes how I feel about myself. It's like, instead of, wishing that I didn't have the need, or, I could have handled it's just a little girl that, like, just needs to be told it's okay. You don't have to have your need perfect, So thank you for that piece, because it really, it affected me. I felt love within.
yeah.
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 And again, that's the presence, of our own
Mhm.
higher self, in a way, like our own wisdom, our own channel of self-recognition and presence, right? That
Yeah.
is the healer within us, and can receive, those truths and support. So great. Yeah.
Hmm.
So good. So, there's a lot here, and this is kind of a, large thing. I don't know if we'll even get done with it today, but let's go ahead and continue just exploring some of these other concepts in there. So I've labeled this the big picture. So he says, life in its broader sense is greatly concerned with the process of spreading divine consciousness and reuniting apparently disconnected aspects. There are many different terms that designate this process. It is often called the divine plan, the evolutionary plan, or the plan of salvation. It is an ongoing process. And this is where I think the Holy Spirit is there too, you know, a ceaseless movement, a flowing energy that seeks to spread out and at the same time to reunify itself. And so that's the Holy Spirit. In this spreading out, the connection is sometimes apparently lost. So the movement is one of spreading out and moving back to source for reunification, forever advancing in this back and forth flow. Creation is the attempt of divine reality to fill the void with life and being. Fragmented consciousness is a result of total consciousness spreading and filling every nook and cranny of space. And we're a conglomeration of consciousness with a spiritual mission to integrate. So consciousness permeates the entire universe and creation, and it permeates everything that it exists. Every particle of matter contains consciousness. Aspects of consciousness float around in the universe. So this is the other thing, you know, we often think of all of the different parts of us as, you know, the child self or the idealized self-image or the defense or whatever. But here he's saying, you know, every trait familiar to human understanding, every attitude known in creation, every aspect of personality is just one of many manifestations of consciousness. So every manifestation that is not yet integrated into the whole needs to be unified and synthesized. Disharmonious and destructive aspects of consciousness are in a state of separation. So, I mean, I don't know if you want to play with, you know, like, so oftentimes we personify certain divine qualities as angelic or angels, right? And angels are messengers. And I think really, you know, it's vibration, right? You know, it's energy again, frequency, vibration. And so there's maybe a frequency of love, a frequency of forgiveness, a frequency of calm and peace, right? And these are, you know, aspects of consciousness. So, you know, in a way, when we personify them as beings, as angels, right? Not only are they, you know, this vibrational space, but it's also intelligence, right? It's also relationship is possible because it's an interacting aspect. And so we can also sometimes call or try to bring to mind and remember divine qualities, right? You know, as and you know, we don't want to try to force our will to make them, you know, make us feel them, but when we can be open and expanded and just present, a lot of times we can just think or call of a divine quality, and we can actually feel that vibration coming in and, you know, helping maybe inform us, especially if, you know, we're praying for it because we could use something like that at the time or whatever. And then the same way with, you know, destructive aspects of consciousness, they, you know, they are also, you know, conscious, but they're in a state of separation. And so it's disharmonious, and so they might be our, you know, the qualities of our defenses, you know, or the lower self qualities that we have. But they have intention, you know, we learn in the Pathwork about lower self pleasure and lower self intention, right? You know, they have, you know, their own personalities in a sense, you know, fully formed that feel different. I mean, how many times when I notice some part of me is acting out, you know, and I separate, you know, afterwards, and you know, at the time I'm identified with it, but then I realize, you know, that's not who I am, you know, that's not really how I want to be. So, you know, I feel like I'm possessed at that point in time, and somehow this particular energy is capable of possessing me because, you know, I'm kind of spellbound. There's a, like almost a hypnotic, you know, kind of word that takes me into these trances, and then I'm lost in this experience that I believe is reality in the moment until I wake up out of the trance. And then I realize, oh my goodness, like where I was living, and that I know is really not the truth of what was happening, or maybe sometimes it still feels a little like that, but if I look at it deeply, I can usually see where no, I was projecting, or that was a part of this. Sometimes I call it a trauma trance because it often is connected to old trauma, but it's like literally, and maybe in the old days we used to call them spells, like a witch would put a spell on us, or something, because they sometimes feel like they are these spells that are cast, and now we are acting like an animal instead of like a human being or whatever. And I don't mean to insult any animals. So
I have a question about that. I mean, because I do the same thing. That's not how I want to be. Okay, that's like the universal, go-to phrase. That's not how I want to be. But reality is that's how part of me is. So what's better, saying that's not how I want to be, or saying that's how part of me really is?
can you do both and?
I suppose I could do both and.
I mean, there's something I think powerful in that, because then you are identifying with the truth of your inner higher self, right? That knows, that wants otherwise, but you're not separating from what is in you, right? And
Yeah.
then that higher self can come and be present to, even if, you're just now waking up out of the, trauma trance or whatever, it's like in that moment, it's still alive in you, and you can come and be present to it and heal it at that moment from there. And then again, the more presence we can have as we work with it, the less we will act it out as well. We'll make a different choice when we can. But we really can't choose. We're not free to choose completely in those situations, in the sense of we can't affect the choice. We are free to choose, and every time you see yourself, to affirm, yes, I see this is in me, and I'm choosing to go, to align with just the higher self, or to, heal that and no longer, act that out through me, right? So I think it's kind of like when we can be in relationship with it from the perspective of the higher self identification, that's where we have the most leverage with it. Does that help?
Yeah, I was going to add to it that, just saying that's how part of me is really, it doesn't give me an easing state of acceptance. It produces the same shame as that's not how I want to be.
So then that's where the healing has to start, right? So that's where, like in a way, the relationship that you have towards your faults and imperfections has to change. And if you're going into the shame, the self-judgment, the self-rejection, right, you can't, it's like your perfectionist is still attacking the inner child, and we need to wake up the higher self to hold them both. Does that make sense? It's like you're in the duality of the war, and we need a third position that can embrace the whole. And there's a kind of process that you can work with that, in the situation, but it's to just even notice, okay, so I can say that that's in me, but I judge it, I don't want it, I resist it, I reject myself because of it, all of that, right? So notice how that feels in your body.
It feels the same as that's not how I want to be.
Right. And so so that's like, how are you resisting that, because it is how you are, right? And so if you're saying, I don't want to be how I am, you're basically wiping out the present moment where change could happen.
Yeah.
So in a way, I did this all my life. I mean, I'm just, I think it probably is why I don't have any memory of much of my life. I mean, I have stories about, what happened, but, I really have no visual memory, and that's part of a thing that I have with my brain. But, there's this way that I remember. I wanted things to be a certain way, and I would get excited and anticipate over, and I would imagine how it was going to be. And then of course it would never be that way. Right. And so I would immediately go, that's not it. And I would basically wipe it out of my experience. Right. It's like, it wasn't how it was supposed to be. I don't want it. I'm not accepting it. Go away. I'm going to just try again. And so it's like, I just kept trying and trying, but I kept wiping, and I could never learn because I was, rejecting the very foundation of the experience in which it could unfold and grow and evolve. So we have to embrace fully, the imperfection in us, and that's called humility, right? Like that's pride and shame are the two sides of the coin, opposites, and to recognize that the way to transform that split is to find true humility that says, I am imperfect, and that's it's the best I am, but I know I want more. I'm not God, but I have a hope, right? I'm not God, but I'm in his likeness. I want, but I can be where I am, because being where I am is where I have to start in order to develop. And so if I reject where I am, I can't grow. I can't take another step towards the light, because I can only start from where I'm at. And to love ourselves, in our imperfection, it's really how God sees us, right? So another way to think about it is, if you want to personify divine consciousness and its relationship to you, which I think we need to do, right? A lot of times in our Western culture, we kind of, we like the God within, and maybe the God in the unfolding of event, but, this God that's in relationship to us, the I, thou, feels like it's kind of like we don't want to be in that child relationship, but in some ways we need that, right? We're always in our humanness going to be limited and in need. And so the transferential processes can be put on the divine. And if we really have a sense that there is a divine love for us, that can, help us also receive our own love and acceptance. And I think they kind of come together. It's kind of like we have to develop our own love to know the divine love is there for us, and we have to feel the divine love for us in order to fully accept our imperfections and love ourselves the way we are. It's like seeing ourselves through God's eyes. So if you were going to try to do that, Frank, is there a way you can kind of zoom out and see all of Frank, knowing all of the
Through
parts
God's
of you?
eyes.
Yeah, all those parts of you, seeing it all through the perspective of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could put that into words at the moment.
Yeah, but if you can feel the possibility that God can see you with great love and compassion and understanding and embracing and acceptance, even in all of your failures and all of your imperfections, then we begin to get close to what we need in order to do the evolution, to grow.
Yeah. I do believe that, the more tolerance we have for ourselves, the more tolerance we have for everyone else. The more love we have for ourselves, the more we have for everyone else.
And how can we know, how can we love ourselves if we don't know that God loves us?
Yeah, that's a tough one because, in our eyes, we're not perfect enough for that.
Yeah, but that's where, that's the Luciferic consciousness that blocks the love of God from entering into us this moment now. It's right here for us, coming to earth for us all the time. And the
Yeah.
mind, this, mind that, it's like it really, that's the one way it can take good people down, right? Is make them feel unworthy.
Yeah, and I grew up Catholic, so that didn't help either.
Yeah. And so, yeah, you might have a God image that you're dealing with, right? So you have to replace this old image that you have of God with what's the true God? Who would the true God be? And how would the true God feel towards you if there was a real God that wasn't the same as the Catholic God image?
Mhm.
So, where I was, I think we'll start here. Just according to its nature, each aspect of consciousness has its own characteristics, its own vibratory movement and frequency rate, and its own emanations of color, scent, and tone. The human being is a conglomeration of various aspects of consciousness. Some are already in clarity and truth. Other aspects of consciousness are negative and destructive, and thus separate, like appendages. It is the task of each human being in each incarnation to synthesize, unify, and assimilate these various aspects of consciousness. Choosing the sacred wound the soul did before incarnation, right? So like when we can realize that it's really our task, and that we came in here to do that, I think it helps also to recognize, who we are is the divine self, and we are bringing in the wounded aspects, the distorted aspects, the separated aspects of God, of self, to reunify them. And there's something about having an experience on this earth plane that, it's difficult, real challenging, and sometimes it takes us forever, but it actually is more easily done and more powerful than if we're trying to evolve in spirit. She says, when the real self takes on a task before it goes into an embodiment, it chooses to take certain aspects of consciousness along with it, if I may put it this way. On the path, you are helped to fulfill this task, which your real self understood, which is to bring unification between the disconnected aspects of your consciousness. So again, if you have a part of you that doesn't like another part of you, that's a disconnected aspect of your consciousness, right? And you need to bring unification, and also to refine, re-educate, and purify these divergent aspects, because in order to truly unify, there's divinity and distortion in all of it, and it can be refined and re-educated and purified with truth and with love. Always those two qualities. Can't do it without either of them. So your ego, which is your active determining outer consciousness, can choose to seek an understanding of these connections or to evade it. Your ego consciousness is the borderline between the inner light world and the outer void. As I said, when the human mind becomes entangled in the partial reality of three-dimensional consciousness, it can easily forget the task, and only through a struggle can it be reawakened to the greater consciousness. I might also add here that human beings receive a great deal of spiritual guidance in this. So when the disconnected mind forgets the greater truth of being, the conscious ego self temporarily identifies with the aspects needing re-education and purification. So in this situation, Frank, it's really, they're not you, right? They're aspects that you brought in with you and got identified with so that you could, experience their effects and then make a different choice and then transform. But in a way, who you really are is the light that did this, amazing journey of sacrifice to come in and bring in the suffering and live through the suffering for the purpose of transforming it. So when we identify with that true nature of ourself as well, and realize that our faults and our imperfections, are just the parts that we are here in service of God to transform, but they're not really who we are ultimately, then it can shift also how we, feel about ourselves, how we feel God feels about us. So the moment you have exposed, owned, and realistically evaluated those negative aspects you had exclusively identified with and therefore struggled against and against seeing, this shameful isolation ceases, and the aspects are seen exactly for what they are, simply aspects of the total self. And, total yourself, but total self, total all self, right? Because it's all one. It is our trauma that often sets up this isolation, but this too is seen as magnetized into the experience of the laws of consciousness. So this was just a little note that I threw in here, but oftentimes, the pain body, the distortion is activated, these aspects of consciousness that we brought in to bring to the light, so to speak. They got activated in us through our early childhood traumas or through, experiences in life that were meant to bring them out so that then we could pay attention to them. And, ultimately, ideally, we can transform them. So all knowledge is in you. After all plans for your life on the material plane are thoroughly discussed and assimilated, you lose consciousness. You undergo a process of anesthetization, which takes a lifetime to awaken from. And that really does feel true. Like, like I'm slowly still awakening, like, and who knows, maybe on my deathbed, then we finally awaken fully or something if we've done the work, right? But it is like an embodiment of more and more of my full nature, right? Which is much bigger than like the 50-50 that I brought in. I brought in these parts to take care, to heal. And I brought in enough of me that was going to be able to, make it a conscious choice. And then, to make the effort and the sacrifice to go there. So the groping process, the process of trial and error, searching, often being confused and not knowing, dealing with the not knowing in a constructive way, finding the often precarious balance between patience and humility for the grace of knowledge to communicate itself on the one hand, and serious commitment, endeavor, focused will, and healthy aggression on the other. So, here again, he's talking about sort of the active and the receptive aspects of this. And again, we're better and we've got distortions in both sides, but we tend to go to the active. And so to really find this balance between patience and humility for the grace of knowledge to communicate itself, to trust that it's coming, that God wants us to have it, that we are committed to finding it, and that's who we are, and that's what makes us like very, very valuable in a sense as souls, on this journey, because we're a little more awake and conscious. And not that any soul is any less than any other soul, but we're sort of the cutting edge of the movement that's trying to bring us into another level of consciousness. So even in the darkest, most ignorant part is the essence of knowledge and light. So take that in, even in the darkest, most ignorant part is the essence of knowledge and light. When the knowledge and light are brought forth from within your own limitations, purification is thorough and reliable and real. Then each particle, each aspect of consciousness has brought forth its own minuscule godness, so to speak. It is your struggle for your essential light that gradually and surely diminishes the anesthesia and awakens you to who you really are. when an entity undertakes to incarnate into another life on Earth, it brings to it the tasks it has to fulfill. The plan is outlined, and in many cases, the spirit itself has the right to discuss its future life with those spirit beings whose responsibility this is. Thus, the incarnating entity can contribute to a certain extent according to its already acquired vision and capacity to judge as to how its destiny will unfold. For in the spirit state, the entity has a wider view than in the body and understands that the purpose of life is not to have it as comfortable as possible, but to develop toward a higher state, to reach perfect bliss as rapidly as possible, a state that does not exist on Earth. The spirit knows that only through spiritual effort can its spiritual knowledge penetrate its intellect. But as a spirit, it also knows that it cannot easily achieve this, and that once incarnated, difficulties, tests, and even so-called disasters are often necessary to lead one to the right path and the right attitude. So, this is where, there's a dynamic that I'm working with that just seems like it's with me forever, and it comes up and shows itself in different situations, but I always recognize it, and more, I still can't quite get enough presence to wake up inside of it or whatever, but, it's like there's a way that when I realize, okay, so that's not just me messing up or being bad, but that's really the piece of consciousness that, is kind of maybe my main soul dent, or some kind of main dynamic in me that I brought in, for me, a lot of it is self-will and resistance to accepting things as they are, right? And so I see myself doing that over and over again, and I know better, right? And I could then say, oh, I'm bad, I know better, what's wrong with me, right? But I learned that doesn't work so well. It's much better to realize, oh, I know better, and this is what I'm practicing right now. And life is going to keep bringing it to me over and over again, so I can practice it as many times as I need to in order to finally transform it. And when I look at it, more as, oh, here it is again, I'm practicing, I'm right up against my edge. I'm not supposed to do it better. I'm supposed to be right where I am and try to move that forward, even if it's just an inch. And when I can focus in that way, again, my relationship to myself is very different than the one that, I used to have, which was, full of self-judgment and inner rejection.
That's very, very helpful, Darlene. Thanks.
So memory fades automatically the moment matter envelops the spirit. This is essential for spiritual awareness has to be fought for. And this can happen only when one takes the trouble to search within the self, not only outside and in general terms for God and the truths of creation, but only within one's own soul can one recognize the very special meaning and purpose of one's life, together with the individual tasks that one has to fulfill. How different your attitude toward yourself must be when you realize that it is the task of human beings to carry negative aspects with them for the purpose of integrating and synthesizing them. This allows for truthfulness without hopefulness. What dignity it lends you when you consider that you undertake this important task for the sake of evolution. So again, this kind of inner shifting of how we view our imperfections and our lower self and our, impurified aspects. And, to again, sink our identity, not in the divergent aspects that we brought in to heal, but in the center self, in the true heart of who we are, that was willing to come here and keep running into them until we can finally somehow transform them. So
Thought on the hopelessness there is it's so it can transform it into hopefulness by holding it in a certain way, but it's kind of a hopefulness without knowing the results.
Exactly.
And there's no real goal to the hopefulness except we're on the path somewhere. Right.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the other, the ego wants everything right now and done, and the guide is saying this is taking a lifetime, or at least one, probably more, and so
I
there
want
is
to see
this,
results. Yeah.
right. And we do, I mean, I think really also if we can just realize that every time we can be consciously present, or at least in the aftermath of something, bring consciousness to it, that really is moving it forward. It's when we deny, suppress, repress, run away from, fight with, that we end up just getting lost in it and staying stuck in it. But even if you have to, see it 1,000 times, and I swear I'm a good example of this, I do get that every time I'm seeing it a little more, I'm recognizing a little more clearly, I'm a little more conscious and present in it. And I'm, maybe still not able to make a different choice in that moment, but, I'm seeing it so much more clearly. And that's a part of it, is like, we have to really know it in ourselves, know this thing. And when we judge it, we can't learn it, we can't understand it, we can't study it, we can't work with it in a positive way. So, it's again this sort of shift in our relationship to what we're carrying as our imperfection that can make a huge difference, and as we take on this larger soul journey and stop thinking from the ego. I call this a life-giving story, right? Whereas the ego says, get it right now, or else you're dead, or you're no good, or you're, and so, that's not very hopeful, and it's not very life-giving, right? We end up feeling contracted and terrible and unhappy and frustrated with ourselves and frustrated with life. And so none of that gives life. What gives life is this kind of acceptance and understanding of this larger soul journey that we came here to do, and we're all doing it. And the more consciously we can do it, the easier it is. We're going to do it whether we're going to do it consciously or unconsciously, but the more conscious and presence we have, the easier and the quicker we can move through the soul substance that's we're transforming.
Yeah, and Darlene, when you're speaking of soul substance, like, are you referring to images?
Of course, that, definitely, I mean, to me, like, yeah, there's, what did the guide call, like, the sort of the original soul thing that we brought in, right? That's imprinted in the soul substance, right? And then of course, all of the images that develop out of our encounter with duality and with the difficulties of that. So, to me, the soul substance is the energetic material that is consciousness impresses and acts on.
Yeah,
and things are embedded in. Go ahead.
yeah, like I noticed for myself, like and like I said earlier, like when it comes to like having a need, a need from somebody else, it's like it seems like there's this cloud of image that like I'm bad for having these needs, or and I'm at a place now where like my presence, I know that I said, oh, there's that image, like there's that image of me being a pain in the butt because I need something, I find it kind of, it's fascinating. It doesn't make the discomfort as I, have to, go inward and just say, this is a dissolving of this image, and it's not true,
Right. Well, and I think that's mean, to me, that's where if you're conscious enough to, sort of recognize that, and what part of it is the image, right? It's like this part that says, I'm bad for having needs,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so when you get that conscious, when that awareness dawns, then you have the corresponding awareness that says, I don't know if that's necessarily true. Would I tell my daughter that? Would I tell my dog that? Like,
you never tell my dog that.
right. So we can challenge, like, to
Mhm.
bring the image into consciousness, then can help us see where that can't be right.
Yeah,
And then we kind of have to go on the search, maybe, for, like, well, what is the truth? Or, how can I, again, how can I accept my own needs? Because
yeah,
that's what's happening, is I am not accepting my needs,
yeah,
right? So, who is the me that is rejecting them, and who is the me that has them? And can I awaken the higher self, to integrate those two parts,
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
there's a whole dialogue that can happen, with all of those places inside, and
Mm.
also sometimes just feelings, going in and feeling the child in her, struggle, and her, like, so how does she feel every time, she's judged for having her need, right?
Yeah, it's like what Frank was saying, there comes that shame, like the shame of,
So that's
which
not
is,
how she feels, that's what you're doing to her. You're
yeah,
shaming her,
yeah,
so,
yeah,
like see if you can feel she has a real need. So, like, can you kind of, I don't know, like go in and help her honor and respect and feel okay with having need? And how would you do that? Like, how could you do that? That's the re-education part. You can see, oh, that's not true, really, that she shouldn't have needs. But now I have to find a way to re-educate her and really help her unravel and re-imprint that
yeah,
truth. And if I can bring her real truth, she'll recognize that, right? I'll
yeah,
recognize that, she'll recognize that.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah,
And maybe, I don't know, I mean, I know my own child, the minute, like, I can go in, and, and oftentimes I am, like, judging her, but if I just keep going deeper into the energy in the body of her contracted state, and keep inviting her to share with me how she feels, because she's not allowed to have feeling or needs, right?
yeah,
Not allowed to, be the way she is. And just kind of, to me, it feels like finally she feels received and can have the experience from you that it's okay for her to have her needs. And she needs to have that experience from you to to transform it.
yeah,
So that's where you're awakening the higher self, instead of like the idealized self-image is the one that goes into, and that's like the split between those two, and the
yeah.
shame and the blame and the, the
That's
child usually is in resistance,
yeah, it's a lot of wasted energy, right? When you could go right into the pool and kind of just, get to the pain, right? Or, just kind of, just feel,
Yeah, feel the pain of not being allowed to have your needs. Feel
yeah,
the pain of having an unmet need. Feel the
yeah,
pain of, needing and not and feeling confused about, how to, like
navigate it,
what you
right?
even need. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Or how to have others receive you in that need.
Yeah,
the
it's
first
not
thing is
that.
for you to receive yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm working, I mean, I'm actively like working on it as, you know, as in this moment, listening to the lecture and yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Thank you.
Huh? So, continuing on, I guess it's important for you, my dear ones, to recognize that many of the events in your life which seem to repeat themselves were chosen and planned by you when you still had your wider vision before matter enveloped your spirit. It will be helpful for you to know this. A very ambitious spirit may sometimes even ask for particularly difficult destiny, knowing clearly in the state of freedom from matter that the pain to be suffered is little and of short duration in comparison to the gain. I suggest to each one of you, my friends, to think about your life and your trials and tribulations, and whether they could not have been chosen by yourself to make sure you do not remain unaware of something that you wanted to fulfill. Contemplate from this viewpoint what you should still find and solve within you. If you search for it with your entire will, again, I find usually I don't have to search for it, it's just right in my face. It's easier that way. Then the answer will be given to you. You will sense it and you will be given insights. And this too has to be learned. It needs practice. So life is your spiritual destiny. So every human being and every spirit erects the world in which he or she lives. You build your home in the spirit world after your life on earth, and you build your future life on earth. Every act, thought, feeling has its form, which then builds the spiritual home, even though temporarily, as well as the destined events of the future incarnation. All this represents not only the natural outcome of the person's individual attitude and outlook, but the spiritual form so constructed indicate exactly what this entity needs for its further development. So again, there's no punishment, no judgment. It's just like, well, and then so that tells us, it's kind of like, you know, the practice tests that we do in school to make an assessment of where we are at in the learning curve and where we need the next step, you know, or what we need to remediate a little bit. So meditate on these words. They contain much. They again exemplify that the equation must always come out right. Hardship is self-created, yet precisely because of that, it contains the only medicine there is. Through this, you can fathom the vastness of divine wisdom in its magnificent lawfulness. Whoever understands this will also understand that destiny and free will are not two mutually exclusive factors, but are interwoven and connected. The events that fate brings to you are spiritual forms, which have to manifest in a concrete way. If through ignorance of these laws, unfavorable forms are created, each being has to dissolve them himself. And this can happen only by entering a spiritual path of inner discipline, self-knowledge, and self-search. So we still have a little time. How are we doing? Dick, you had to leave early or?
Yeah, I'm looking at the time, but I can hang in for a few more minutes because this is good stuff.
Okay.
But I might just sign off and.
Yeah, whenever, you know,
Okay.
I'll keep going a little ways more and see. Yeah, I don't know if we're going to finish this, so I'm willing to just stop whenever people are ready.
Well, you're just recorded, so you'll send me a recording, right?
Right.
Okay.
So why is life so hard? To the degree that struggle and tension exist in the personality, the various aspects of consciousness will be at odds with one another. So that's where we're split inside, you know, and so the critic is mad at the child and the child is, you know, fuck you to the critic. And, you know, we're all going in all kinds of, you know, resistant directions. And so we're unaware of the larger processes, and we then try to identify with one or several of these aspects of consciousness without knowing what the true self is and where it is located or how it can be found in this maze of discord. So you wonder if you are your best qualities or if you are your over severe conscience, which annihilates you for your negative traits. Or are you perhaps the destructive demon within you? Which is your best self? Is it your rage at the demon in you or your total negation of its existence? Whether individuals know it or not, this inner struggle and search is ongoing. And the more conscious the struggle is, the better. it is a human distortion to identify with any of the above mentioned aspects. You are neither your negative aspects nor your self-punishing, superimposed conscience, nor even your positive traits, even though you have managed to integrate the latter into the fullness of your being. This is not the same as identifying with them. It is more accurate to say that you are the part of you which manage this integration by determining, deciding, acting, thinking, and willing, so that you could absorb into yourself what was previously an appendage. Each aspect of consciousness possesses a will of its own. And it's very interesting to see that, to see all of these different wills inside of us. And when you are blindly submerged in the struggle, each of these various aspects will control you in turn, because the real self that could determine your identification differently has not yet found its power. So this is kind of like, to me, where the work is now, is to try to awaken this real self and help it find its power. The missing sense of self leads to despair. To gain a deeper understanding and a clearer picture of reality, you must first know that you brainwash yourself continually, particularly in relationship to your experiences in life. As long as the connection between inner reality and inner conditions or landscapes on the one hand, and outer experience on the other, is as tenuous as it is now in most human beings, the nature of life and the relationships between life and self are totally distorted. The box in which the mind finds itself becomes painfully narrow and limited. All perceptions are untrustworthy because the main perception of life and self is off-center. Such an event reflects specific distorted ideas, which in turn engender specific and distorted action, reaction, and volition. When this connecting bridge is established, an entirely different worldview comes into being, and little by little, the false focus shifts and one's vision of life moves into a clearer perspective. So when a new child enters the earth, its soul stuff is very malleable and very soft. And within this soul stuff lie all the potentials, the talents, qualities, tendencies, characteristics, and also the unresolved problems. It is according to these potentials, positive as well as negative, that the entity grows. The malleable, soft substance of the soul is by its very nature very impressionable. Therefore, when the child collects impressions during its early years, their impact will be greater or smaller according to the underlying potentials. Where the soul is potentially healthy and strong, even negative impressions will not make a deep dent. The experience is registered and assimilated realistically, so that the personality learns and grows from the experience, whether or not it was happy or unhappy. Where the underlying potential is positive, the corresponding soul stuff will be so resilient that even a seemingly detrimental occurrence will bounce off of it in a manner of speaking. It will not leave a lasting remark other than the benefit of increased understanding. When you have retained an impression in soul stuff that is not resilient in this way, your entire psychic mechanism functions according to this impression, exaggerating it way beyond its reality value. An image forms in the soul, and the one-time occurrence is generalized and thereby falsified. A destructive pattern is set in motion, which remains in force as long as the soul dent in the soul stuff is not smoothed out. The healing comes about only through the kind of active self-finding that you are engaged in. So, this is, I think, also important to see, and really acknowledge, like, it's in our family dynamics, but they were just there to bring it out of us. We brought it in, and it's like we need good enemies. We need, people that are going to challenge us and trigger us to bring it out so that we can be conscious. It's like bringing it into the light of awareness so that we can then start working on it. Because if it remains in the unconscious, we don't see it. And oftentimes, it's brought out, but then it still isn't identified as something, within us for us to, work with, but it's seen as either their fault or my fault. And then, it's just judged. We're bad, we're good, they're bad, they're good.
Um,
And go ahead.
yeah, right there in that paragraph. It's what I've always thought is that your false core image is the human manifestation of your soul death.
Exactly. Exactly. And and then, again, we chose the parents to, give us the, not the soul dent, but the sacred wound,
Circumstances.
right? It's like,
Circumstances to
right,
produce.
right.
Yes.
And it's like what I say up here, it's a sacred wound that we get, in the lifetime that activates or brings out the soul dent. And
Yeah.
oftentimes it is a trauma, for the child because of this over tender soul substance. And especially where, it's gonna hurt. I mean, no matter what. But I know many people that, I mean, they've suffered a whole lot more than I have, and they're much more, resilient in some ways, right? In certain areas, right? So you can see how it's not just the childhood trauma that is creating all of this, but how, the soul dent needs to be activated inside of us so we can work with it. So I think I skipped something here. Over tender soul stuff causes both conscious and unconscious pain. Since the effect is bound to be detrimental, the psyche seeks a remedy. Such unconsciously sought remedies are often more destructive than the original evil, as for example, the defenses and pseudo solutions. A childhood trauma produces deprivation, unhappiness, destructive feelings and behavior, in short, neurosis, only indirectly. It is not in itself responsible for that. The healthy soul also experiences early unhappiness, but throws off the effects without deeply imprinting negative patterns. It is these negative patterns that are directly responsible for the unhappy experience in the present. You must understand this point clearly and work through the negative patterns to overcome that which holds you back from life. That's why I like to, like we take a particular instant in our life that's triggered us, right? But then rather than just dwell on that instant, like we try to distill, like what is the general pattern in that harkens back, through the dynamics, and we can begin to see it's not just this one instance, but oh, here it is. And a lot of times when we see it's originating one, it's easier to also work with at that level, and hold the child in that part of it. Your parents are not finally responsible for your misconceptions. Resentment against them violates the law of self-responsibility. Thus, dwelling on the childhood experience alone can give at best a partial understanding. It cannot produce vital and significant change. The latter is possible only when you profoundly understand your destructive patterns and drastically change them. Your life will teach you. So, the way home, being with what is, we talked a little bit about that, right? Within you now. So, if you could trust the flux of time, the benign quality of its movement, and the growth it can foster, and this is kind of one way that I see the Holy Spirit, right? It's the flow of time and what it brings. And if we could trust it and allow ourselves to bring the inner faculties in harmony with it, we would not need to manipulate time by holding it back or pushing it forward. We would not need to fear or wish for fulfillment in the future, nor would you have to reach back into the past for fulfillment. This, after all, happens only because you do not trust the future. You do not trust yourself to live the now when the future comes. So that's like a big thing, right? It's not about trusting that the future is going to be fine. It's trusting that we can trust ourselves to fully live that now, whatever it is, when the future comes. And that is fearlessness, right? When we can know that level of faith I guess, or trust in, this actual reality that we're living in as benign, right? As coming for us, to us, even when it hurts. And this is how we go out of, the 100 child consciousness into the both and. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. But then that moves fully into the unitive place that realizes, oh no, it's all good. Even the difficulties, even the hard parts were exactly what was needed, was exactly what was required for me to, go to where I'm going. So only when you live in the now do you live in reality. So this is the other, like, really key. And this is part of this practice of bringing ourselves back to our senses, back to our, in this moment. And that's where all of the higher self and the wisdom and the inspiration from spirit can come, is when we are present to ourselves in this moment, in reality. So when we fight the now, by fighting it, you only stop the movement, this benign flux of time. And by accepting it, you follow the movement and it will carry you through. So even if it's a difficult thing, if we can accept it, then we flow with it and the momentum carries us through. What I always do, particularly in certain types of movements, is, totally resist it, right? And then I'm like just lost in it for hours and in this battle with it, right? And it stays there or it gets worse until I can finally recognize what's happening and see if I can shift. So if you accept the pain and consciously connect with its meaning, it ceases to be pain. So, again, going into the pain, like we talked about before, and when we're really feeling it in the present moment, in that sensory capacity, not our story about, oh, I was abandoned, or, oh, this was so terrible, like the story, but we're just feeling what we're feeling in our body now, and it may be connected with the story, but if we drop the story and just come in to the sensory, then it shifts it. And one, we can connect with its meaning, like as we're with it, like everything we need to know about it is right there. And also it ceases to be pain. We cease contracting against the contraction because we're being with it. And that changes the sensory experience of it a great deal. And especially if the pain was based on our story about it, right? Oftentimes, again, it was an image. It's not even true in the moment. It was an overgeneralization. We're projecting and recreating the past in the present. And it's not even anything that we should be worried about. And here we are in a full-blown trauma trance with it. And so, as we begin to kind of pull ourselves back out of that and ground in this moment now, in our senses, in our feelings, and whatever is alive in us, then we can be present to it in a way that gets its meaning, holds it, in not judgment, but in an understanding and a compassion. Oh, I see you. I see you. That really hurts, right? We can be with it. So it is with the bleak or dark or negative mood, we don't have to judge it. We can just recognize, oh, there's pain here. Let me go be with the pain. Even though I know I'm in defense, or it may just be, a projection, I can just go be with the pain. And hold that pain and breathe that pain and call light to that pain and seek, a deeper understanding. And as long as I'm holding it in a compassionate place, not judging it, not rejecting it, then it will unfurl itself, it will unravel itself, it will reveal itself, and it will transform itself and leave the system, at least some segment of the energy that's trapped in our body, mind, consciousness, that held there from, these soul dents and traumas. So commit yourself to comprehend the meaning of the mood, and your inner path will reveal the answer. I like that, like we can be in these moods, and oh, I'm just kind of grumpy, or I'm, like, well, go in and discover what's really there and why it's there. And it doesn't have to be a figuring out. In fact, it's better to feel it out. And so what does the mood feel like in your body? You know, you might notice that you're labeling it depression or boredom or something like that. But what exactly do those words mean at the sensory level? How do you know you're bored? Oh, I'm feeling sort of an emptiness in the pit of my belly and a restlessness in my legs or something, you know, or how do you know it's lonely? Oh, I'm feeling an emptiness in my heart, you know, or you know, some kind of deep contraction, you know, or my heart just feels like it's nothing but a stone, right? So all of these are sensory ways that we can get information, you know, kind of metaphorically, and we can begin, you know, working with these states, these moods, these, you know, things inside of us. And they reveal more and more as we pay attention to them. So move with, go into and through whatever you are experiencing now. So when your mood clouds over and you fall into despair and struggle against the mood, you do not follow the inner movement and continue to believe that you are in the only final world of darkness. I say to you, my friends, the mere fact that you consider these thoughts of truth without struggle and panic, without fearful ideas of finality. So whatever we're feeling, you know, like to remember, it's a movement through, it's a passing through. It's not the totality of reality or the rest of my life or anything like that, right? Which is kind of how the image holds it. So if we can remember, no, it's a process, it's a moving through, that will help and make you aware that there is movement taking place. And this will make an enormous difference, for it will lead you to explore and find out what the movement into the cold means for you. Instead of struggling against the darkness, go into it, accept it as a temporary state, and move with it. Like the Aikido of Pathwork, right? And so this again, you know, is this counter effect. You know, we judge it, and now we're against it instead of moving with it. And a lot of times we can even feel where, you know, in the body we're kind of stuck or frozen, you know, and so you can use your breath to breathe into those paces and give it, you know, energy to move. And then also notice, like, where am I contracting and holding so that there's no space for it to move? Can I imagine with my breath making space inside of me, and then just being with that sensation and, you know, inviting it to move. And oftentimes it will, you know, some sensation will start to change that felt kind of permanent and stuck there. And you can just follow it with your awareness. And sometimes it takes you to other parts of your body, or, you know, other places in your field, new awarenesses. So it's really cool to kind of recognize, oh, movement is, you know, movement is what I need in this situation to feel where I'm at and to welcome its movement. And rather than immediately trying to correct what you observe, greet it as a symptom that will lead you like a well-marked road into deeper understanding and awareness of yourself. So again, we're so into correcting. I see what I'm doing that's wrong, correct me, you know. And God's saying, no, you know, be curious, stop correcting, use it as something to learn and study, know yourself more. Imagine that your true being, which means your being in truth, all in truth, observes the suffering part of you that is squeezed into a smaller world in which you sometimes appear to suffocate. Your real being is without any shades of untruthfulness, error, distortion, sin, and therefore in total well-being. There is no pain there. This true being observes your earth being that has undertaken to correct the distorted part with compassion for the momentary difficulties. So this is another way of like seeing ourselves out of that place of judgment. Can we see ourselves compassionately? Can we see the distorted part in its confusion and lostness and its pain, and open our heart to it? The higher self sees no tragedy, for it knows that all is well, and that the temporary suffering must lead to salvation. Not one of you ever has to encounter a difficulty he is not strong enough to surmount. Do not doubt the resources of strength that exist in your soul. So this sometimes is, something that I use to comfort my fears, right? That no matter what life is going to bring, including my death, that it's never a difficulty that I'm not strong enough to face and meet, and that I have all the resources I need within myself. So acceptance of life is the divine way to accept everything life brings, both good and bad, and retain a positive attitude. The distortion is in the struggle of self-will against accepting anything hard. The refusal to accept life's terms can be on the surface or can be hidden. Detachment is achieved only after one has accepted all that life has to offer, including death. Only those who have gone through the feared experience will arrive at true serenity. So what does that bring up? Stuff that makes it difficult? I guess we lost stick now. So, it's like, this is where the duality comes in, because we don't want to hurt. We don't want to suffer. We don't want to be in discomfort, right? And so it's just kind of a natural fact of being embodied in a vulnerable, sensitive, physical form that, we sets up this dualistic kind of response. And it really does take conscious effort and, work to overcome, again, sort of our natural fight flight, the way our mind projects into the future, and sees everything in terms of the pain and the suffering of the past.
Yeah, and we also don't want to see the ones we love in those states of
Yes.
moil.
Yes. Yeah. And this is where I think there's a good teaching, like most of the time when people we love are suffering, it's kind of even worse than our own. And oftentimes we kind of are in a state of empathy, sympathy, or our child is identifying with them as well, so we're sort of identified, and it really doesn't help them for us to come and feel as badly as they do. Right? It's not as of service to them, and it certainly isn't of service to us. It just brings us down. And what I think is helpful is for us to be able to be present with their suffering, which means we have to learn how to be present with our own suffering in order to do that. And then when we can have that heart presence there, we can actually be an energy space of compassion and upliftment, right? Instead of falling down in it, it's like it will help them in their suffering, if we stay in the light and help extend that light to them, because they can't reach it right now. So it's kind of our job to not go into empathy, sympathy, but to, like connect with this larger state of compassion and holding the pain in sort of this way of knowing, again, that it is temporary, that it will somehow deepen and be of, some beautiful result as they pass through, right? It's the state is not punishment, it's not judgment, it's not, it's purification, it's transformation, it's what's going to awaken them ultimately and take them to the next highest, step on the path. So, it's again in that unitive way, all good. And if we can remember that for them when they can't, and kind of hold and pray from there. It can be of help for us and for them.
Because then I'm thinking, because then they end up taking care of you.
Yeah, exactly. If
Right,
you're
like they
right.
they leave themselves to, to kind of make you feel better.
Mhm. Or they won't be real and let that
Yeah,
space be met in them. They'll feel somehow distorted around it, and in whatever distortion, whether it's humiliation or whether it's they want to protect you or whatever, it's distracting them from the work that's possible here now.
right.
So when your will is not done, let's see, did I read that also? It is only when you accept death in its undisguised nakedness without running from it that you can truly live. Only then will you find that there is no death and no duality. You will accept this not as a consoling faith to which you cling out of weakness and fear, but as an actual experience. And you can experience this only in the infinitely great and ultimate issues when you learn to experience it first in your daily little deaths. When your will is not done and you cringe from suffering in the wrong and healthy way, you increase the tragic duality. You reject death, and therefore, in the ultimate sense, you reject life. The flight from death and suffering causes flight from life and pleasure, often inadvertently. It is here we say the justice of God is not just, right? When we're resisting and it's here that our inner, consciousness is in rebellion as a satanic, kind of defense. And so Carolyn Mace also talks of this inner process of hanging on that cross, right? That, we're being crucified on right now, until we can pull the suffering, transmute the suffering of the pain and anger, like this kind of eye for an eye, tooth for tooth energies of justice within us, up into the heart of acceptance, forgiveness, compassion, unification with it, right? And in a way, the cross itself is kind of an image of duality unified in the heart, right? And part of what we're trying to do is learn how to accept life's suffering, accept the cross of incarnation. To be born is to be crucified in some sense, right? And so when we can understand and not flinch or run or, fear the cross, but recognize in some way that we're carried through it, that we are given, the support that we need, even in the darkest of hours. And I don't know if anybody else has had this experience, but I know, it's kind of the little hardships that are more hard in some ways than the really big ones, because it always feels like there's some kind of influx of spiritual support that carries you through some of the bigger, intense, huge transitions. And it's kind of like just the everyday ones that begin to distort and get you in darkness and keep you down. To accept life's adversities does not mean to take a dark view of everything. The true and right course is, I expect life to bring me unhappiness as well as happiness. I will not flinch from life's clouds. I will not fear the darkness. Only by going through adversity courageously will I be able to bear happiness and be able to give happiness. So, and courage is a quality of the heart as well, right? And to know that we can ask for courage and receive courage from the Holy Spirit as a divine quality is sometimes what we need going through adversity. You can arrive at spiritual poise only if you do not flinch from unhappiness and distorted self-love, self-pity, and cowardice. If you learn from the hard times and ask God in your darkest hour what it is that he wants you to learn and what it is in you that has caused misfortune to come to you, then you have the right attitude. If you do not allow yourself to think the sun will never shine again, and you shall accept the darkness constructively, you will also find your own inner causes for the dark hours. Ask yourself, what do I mean by feeling as I do? Am I struggling against life's realities? Does my struggle mean that I reject through pride and self-will the lessons life has to teach me? Am I afraid of this lesson, of this sign that I love myself too much? Am I afraid of the little hurts and disadvantages? In all the hardships, there are certain general lessons to be learned by everyone alike in every hour of test and difficulty about pride, self-will, and fear. Isn't the seeker who kicks and struggles against unhappiness acting out of pride? Doesn't the personality often react in emotional outbursts? Why should I be unhappy? I do not want to be unhappy. Only a perfect being could rightfully make the demands you so often make more or less unconsciously. So this is, taking me back to, like all of the frustrations that I can have, just dealing with, like getting help with computer stuff or phone trees. We had the power go out and I was trying to call the power company, and, and there's this kind of place where I find in me that I get, very in pride, like I feel like I'm sort of a Karen, what they call a Karen. How dare you be this way to me?
Shouldn't be happening to me. Like, why is this happening to me? Like,
and I think underneath that is a deeper trauma that I usually feel, because there's some part of me that is really like in need and needs help, and like somehow help can't be found. Right. And so there's this deep childhood trauma of feeling distressed and things are not okay. And I have a need for help, and that need is not seeming to be responded to. And so then, that increases the fear, or increases the, reaction inside, and the, fear and demand, and
like a panic, right? Like a panic, right?
Yeah.
Like that it's
And
always
demand, how dare you be this way? How dare this be this way? It can't possibly be this way. I refuse to accept it that way.
What's wrong with you people?
Right, what's wrong? The whole world is messed up and I'm the only one that knows the truth.
Yeah.
So it's hard, like, to, in that I think we have to sit with the deeper suffering there, right, than just judge it is a Karen attitude, it is pride, it is self-will, it is fear, right, it is lower self. But can we meet the lower self instead of with judgment, instead of with rejection, instead of with, our idealized self-image, saying that we shouldn't be that way, that we recognize, no, this is something in my child that I brought here to heal, and it's still active in me. And so this whole experience is, offering me another opportunity to try to meet it, in a higher way, right?
Loving way, right? In a loving, like
in a loving way, yeah.
In a loving way.
And the more we can do that for ourselves, then I think the greater our resilience and our self-acceptance as well, that, reduces all of that trauma in there. But it's we have whatever we are working on. It seems like it takes forever, and we just keep recycling and recycling and recycling it. But don't lose hope. Don't go into self-judgment about that. Just know it's a big deal. It's like it's really stuck in you. It's something that, is got a lot of trauma within it. And so it just needs this whole lifetime to find its way back into the light and truth. And, we can have compassion for it. We can accept it as it is, knowing that it's not our final truth or reality, and that
it's like
go ahead.
Yeah, it's like the spiral, right? Like, even though it feels so familiar, if you really take a minute to be with yourself, there may have been one little like twitch, like one little thing that you actually did do a little differently, you know, that it's not.
Or
that-
maybe in this moment now, you can do one thing differently by not judging. in yourself,
Yeah.
You know, like by seeing it more clearly, feeling it in your body, recognizing the terror that's alive in there underneath the rebellion or the rage or the, you know,
Yeah.
and today, and in today's world, you know, there's so much. I was reading something about Mary Magdalene, and it was about, you know, like this embodiment of, you know, outrage and grace at the same time, right? Because in some ways the world is outrageous, you know, or all of this is, you know, there are outrages, there are sufferings, there are people doing god awful things to each other, etc., to me, to you, you know, and so we can, you know, the system is outrageous, you know, the corporations are outrageous, the politicians are outrageous, you know, there's a lot of outrage, and yet if we just go to outrage, you know, then we're just in the hell realms of it. So
Right.
how can we have this outrage with grace, right? To name and align and understand, yes, outrage is there, but to call the light to it and to, you know, recognize that there's something else that is trying to happen. And with our awareness, maybe we can, in transforming it within ourselves, you know, be a part of the larger cultural transformation. And help find a way to hold our own outrage in all of this, right? You know, and I think a lot of what the Pathwork is presenting is exactly that. You know, how do we have all of our feelings, all of our imperfections, all of our truths, and out, you know, like that means that's not really okay, and yet it is. And so then how can I embrace and accept it as a temporary manifestation that we can hopefully move beyond and discover something new about it that can help it transform. So yes. So he's saying, you know, not to shrink, but accept the darkness constructively. And then he says, ask yourself, what do I mean by feeling as I do? Am I struggling against life's realities? Does my struggle mean that I reject through pride and self-will the lessons life has to teach me? Am I afraid of this lesson, of this sign that I love myself too much? Or maybe not enough, right? You know, this is where, you know, like a lot of our loving ourselves too much is because we don't really in a healthy way love ourselves enough. And so I'm afraid of all the little hurts and disadvantages. In all the hardships, there are certain general lessons to be learned by everyone alike in every hour of tests and difficulty. So I think I read that, right? So every one of you can learn that in difficult times, you can fear, your fear can only leave you if you learn to embrace unhappiness as a necessary medicine without thinking that you will always remain sick or at all times be in need of this medicine. This is acceptance of life. As you go through these steps, you become aware of your higher self, not as a theory or a philosophical premise, but as a stark reality right here and now. You experience yourself as the real entity you are, have always been, and always will be, no matter what the isolated aspects of consciousness fabricate in the way of delusion and folly. This is indeed a great and wonderful task. In the process, you learn about your inner reality and all its varied aspects and levels of consciousness. You see that the outer event in relationship to your inner landscape. The inner landscape is then no longer some symbolic or colorful analogy. It is indeed reality. So that concludes this kind of composite mishmash. I think I want to try to reorganize it a little bit, but has a lot of good points in it from a lot of
It definitely did. It definitely was really nice.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks for putting that together, because I thought it was great.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. And hopefully we'll do it again in 2. Take
Okay,
care.
good night. Good night. Bye, Frank.
Bye.
Bye, Darlene.